One term history teachers are going to throw at you a lot is civilizations, or sometimes nations or empires. And a lot of times, people like myself can assume students know exactly what we're talking about when we start to dive into the traits of civilizations or learning about Rome or Greece or Egypt or whatever it may be. So, with this first lesson in Module 1, I'm actually going to try to give you some real basic definitions and setup for that word civilizations, and most importantly for you, kind of guiding you into your second practice and application assignment where you're going to be considering what can be positive indicators of a civilization and negative ones. And if you don't follow along with this and get the basics, that assignment might be a little difficult. So you might be wondering, why is the slide pure blank white? I like, whether it's in person or online, to kind of teach pulling up little chunks at a time so you can follow along, maybe in smaller doses, if that makes sense. Now, not a term you have to necessarily memorize, but there is a period in history in 12,000 BC. It's a 7,000 year range to 5,000 BCE. So that's going to be the time period where years were actually counting downwards to zero. And then, of course, now years go upward, 2024 to 2025 to 2026 or whatnot. Uh, and so 12,000, 5,000 BCE is going to be that many years plus 2024 at the time I'm making this recording years ago. Now, what matters about all this, I'm not going to have you memorize 7,000 years of history here, is that by the end of this 7,000 year window was the time that human beings started to live with each other, kind of organized as groups, and the development of writing, as well as the development and knowledge to farm and grow crops and domesticate animals, all started to be things humans could do regularly by 5000 BCE, which again is roughly 7,020 something years ago. So a lot of historians mark the end of this 7,000 year window as the true beginning of history. Now, before we move on, let's define what a civilization is. A civilization, this is ripped just from the internet, this isn't something I made up right before I pressed record on this, is a society. So that means more than one people or persons living with each other, usually a group, a large group that lives with each other. I mean, United States of America is a society. That might be the most familiar example I could give to you, and it is characterized by a variety of things. I'm going to show you or talk to you about 7 here in a second, but it could be uh, certain areas where people live in, such as cities or rural farm areas. Social class, where money sort of divides people into different categories. There's going to be some kind of government. There's going to be written language, as well as a few other things. Okay, civilizations have to be complex. They have to have these features. It can't just be, and this is why like caveman times didn't count as civilizations, because there wasn't really written language, there wasn't forms of money and things like that yet when that era of humanity existed. So with that said, let's talk about your second slide, which is a precursor into your second assignment. And that is going to be the 7 traits of any civilization, whether it's the United States, ancient Egypt, the Mongols, the Ottoman Empire, or whatever you might learn about this semester in Global Campus. Number 1 is social classes. Social classes have always existed since the beginning of history. You might be most familiar with this in terms of kind of how people are divided up based on wealth and money and status in society. That's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but the reality is social classes might, you might think with money, like my example here: rich, poor, middle class, homeless, upper middle class, working class. You hear those phrases today in society even, or how people are divided up by power. So kings and queens at the top, nobles second, or lords, knights third, maybe peasants fourth, slaves fifth. How you kind of divide up the hierarchy and who has the most power or influence in a given civilization. Number 2 is going to be public works. These are things that a government, which is a requirement of a civilization, are going to provide or maybe not provide to the people that live in that civilization. Easy examples could be roads or a military that would protect people. Obviously, roads you can travel on. Parks, places people can go for walks and entertainment and spend time with others and things of that nature. Number 3 is going to be religion, or that religion in some way, shape, or form, not necessarily like one religion, but religion is a factor in a civilization. That could be beliefs in one higher power or multiple higher powers. You can have civilizations that believe in all different kinds of religions. You can have societies where one religion is like the only religion you are allowed to believe in. But historians will always say that religion is going to be a factor in society, whether it's promoted and allowed and freely worshiped, maybe whether it's restricted or banned. Religion has to be a part of a civilization. Number 4 is specialization, which really is just a fancy way of saying that people in a nation or group of people living with one another have specific roles, that they have tasks, they have jobs, they have duties they do every day. Um, Even right now, I'm doing my duty or job as a teacher. That's my specialization. You have nurses and doctors and lawyers and coaches and delivery drivers and pilots and on in our world today. Back in others older civilizations, might have had craftsmen and welders and knights and jobs and tasks, whether glamorous or whether really, really horrible and unpleasant, things that people do to, in quotes, kind of contribute to that civilization or society on a daily basis. Trait number 5 a civilization has to have is writing of some kind. You might be most familiar with the English language or the Spanish language or Chinese language, but all civilizations back to the Sumerians in Mesopotamia have to have some kind of written communication to be called a civilization. Number 6 are going to be arts. Now, some of you might immediately think just of paintings, but arts can mean a whole wide variety of things, from music to athletics to, yes, painting and other things, even like fashion, I'd put into the arts. These are things that are individualistic. So you might have people that are into music and contribute to music that have nothing, no interest, maybe even in like the example I used, fashion, a second ago. But those things can become ingrained into society and be distinct features of a civilization. So you might hear phrases like that's a French painting, or that's an Italian outfit, or that's an American athlete, to describe certain features of a civilization or certain individuals inside of a civilization. Number 7, I mentioned out loud before, is going to be government. If a civilization exists, there's going to be some form of government. Now, that could mean kings and queens, evil dictators, emperors, things like presidents and prime ministers, shared power. It doesn't necessarily have to be one person. You can have congresses and parliaments and things of that nature. But government, whether productive or evil in society, is going to exist in a civilization. That's where you're going to have politicians and lawmakers and courts and justice systems, and things like taxes, which will, for better or for worse, cause society to grow and flourish, but it can also harm society and harm the individuals living in an empire, a nation, or civilization. Now, that's your lesson, and you're going to take that. And now that you hopefully know a little bit about the 7 traits of civilization, you are going to go into Canvas, and for your next part of this semester, this module, you're going to complete. It is a table where you're going to, now that you've been introduced to the concepts and definitions, describe in your own mind the traits being how they could be a positive society, and then how they could be a negative in society. So instead of just defining terms or matching terms, you're going to have to be a little creative and uh, come up with how you think a society could be successful in each trait, and then how you think a society could be harmed or unsuccessful in each of the 7 traits. I'll go back that I just walked through with you now. Okay, the doc will give you a little more explanation, but it is important that you do this assignment, as it is worth points, and you should complete it before you move on to anything in Module 2. And of course, email me if you have any questions. Thank you, and have a good day.